there, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Ghosts in the Machine. Yeah, that was a little over dramatic, but you know what? Get used to it because a lot of the stuff we're dealing with in this video has been over dramatized. So what are we going to do? We're going to take a look at the 1986 Smurl Family Haunting, which is the story behind the new Conjuring film called Last Rites. Bing. That's right. This is a new film, the fourth in the franchise of the Conjuring titles. Like in other films in this franchise, Ed and Lorraine Warren were, of course, involved to some degree. Now, it's not anywhere near as what's going to be portrayed in the film. Rest assured, I mean, they mostly phoned it in. I mean, they did visit the house a few times, but for the most part, they were talking over the phone with the Smurl family. And Ed and Lorraine Warren actually sent their team, like I guess a psychic team, as he calls it, to go out and do his work for him. Unless, of course, there were news cameras around, because if there was any kind of press at all, you can bet money that Ed would make sure he was there, right in front of the camera, with the spotlight on him, talking his bullshit. But before we get into the research and comparing notes of newspapers and interviews and what's going to be in the film or what was in the book, I want to go over a timeline of the Smurl haunting case because I want everyone on the same page. So I'm going to go from the beginning when they moved in all the way up and ending with the 2025 release of The Conjuring 4. So let's get into it. In October of 1973, Jack and Janet Smurl move into 330 Chase Street in West Pittston, Pennsylvania. This is the left side of a duplex. Sometimes they call it a block house, but it's one big house that's split right down the middle, and people live on one side and people live on the other side. They move in with their two daughters, Dawn and Heather. In December of 1973, John and Mary Smurl move into 328 Chase Street, which is the right side of the same house. In September of 1978, twins are born to the Smurl family. Daughters Shannon and Karen join the family. On April 29th, 1985, Janet claims that they had their first encounter, their first experience with what they would later associate with the paranormal. And that was when they were all getting ready for Heather's confirmation service, and some of them were gathered in the kitchen, not everyone, but some of them were in there, and a light fixture, which apparently was like 4 feet long, by like a foot wide, came crashing down without warning. But, I mean, to be honest, a lot of those accidents happen without warning. The very next day, on April 30th, 1985, Janet claims that she heard what she thought was her sister's voice, and she heard it twice, and then came upstairs, didn't find anyone, that was it. On October 1st, 1985, Janet Smurl appears in the Times Leader newspaper complaining about muddy water from PG&W, which is the Pennsylvania Gas and Water Company. And there is complaints about disgusting water coming out of the pipes, but there is no mention of any demons or ghosts or anything weird going on then. But it's a neighborhood-wide problem, so that's probably why it wasn't associated with ghosts, until the Warrens came in. Speaking of which, in December of 1985, Janet Smurl calls Ed and Lorraine Warren for the first time. I don't know the exact date, but according to Lorraine, that's when they were called. January 17th, 1986, Ed and Lorraine Warren visit the house for the first time, allegedly with a psychic in tow. But that psychic's name changes depending on the version of the book that you read. On February 14th, 1986, Lorraine Warren videotapes an interview with Jack and Janet Smurl inside their house at 330 Chase Street. And during the interview, Lorraine asked Jack,
"How long were you in this home with your family before you became aware of the fact that things of a paranormal nature were occurring?"
Approximately 1 year ago.
1 year ago, in 1985,
Yes.
you became aware that something paranormal was taking place.
So this contradicts what we read in the book The Haunted, because there is plenty going on before 1985. I mean, it starts out in 1974 saying that there was a stain on the rug that they couldn't get out. They had to get rid of a brand new rug because of this stain. That Jack's TV burst into flames all by itself. That there were leaky pipes, even though that Jack or John, his father, was an experienced welder, that all the renovations that they did with water pipes, all the joints leaked. And then they leaked again when they fixed it. They found scratches on a porcelain sink when they just installed it. In 1975, Dawn kept claiming that she was seeing people floating around her bedroom. In 1977, according to the book, the Smurls were well aware that the house was spooked in some way. According to the book, toilets flushed by themselves, radios turned on full blast even though they were unplugged. There were phantom footsteps heard upstairs in the hallway. There was dresser drawers opening and closing by themselves with nobody actually doing them. Jack himself feeling a phantom caress that he thought was his wife, but it wasn't. There was nobody there. Even in 1983, they claimed that there was unexplainable odors, which actually turned out to be sewers. There was a sewer problem in the area, and that's what the smell was from. But all of this happened before 1985. So we got to ask, what's the deal with that? But don't worry, we'll address the book a little later. In August of 1986, for some reason, the Smurls decide to go public with their alleged haunting, and they talk to a Minnie McClellan. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but she is a reporter for the Wilkes-Barre Sunday Independent. It's not digitized yet, so I wasn't able to get a copy of that yet. But apparently there's a little blurb that was from the family asking for help because they think their house is haunted. I don't know why they decided to go public, even though they were in touch with the Warrens. I guess, I'm speculating here that the Warrens weren't doing a great job, so maybe they were reaching out to other people for help. So later that month, either on the 23rd or 25th of August, the Smurls held a press conference in their backyard. And in attendance were local news crews, they had journalists there, of course, Ed and Lorraine Warren were there because, cameras and spotlight. And there were also two other people there. Richard A. Bush, who was a mentalist and the chairman of the Paranormal Investigating Committee of Pittsburgh, and also Milton Rothman, who is a physicist and professor at Trenton State College. They were there on the behalf of PsyCop, which is the organization that I work for. It used to be called the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, and then because that was a mouthful, they changed it to CSI, which means the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. But they were there, and they tried to get in. They wanted to offer their services. They offered to set up a camera system in order to record all the alleged activity that was going on in the house. They offered psychiatric evaluations for Jack Smurl and Janet Smurl. That was not an insult to the family. That was not saying that they were crazy or something like that. Basically, this was an offering to help to see if there were any mental health issues. And that's standard in any kind of investigation like this. You have to rule that out. So we offered to pay for it. We offered to cover it. But we were denied. And why? Because Ed Warren was standing on the porch and absolutely refused to allow the two scientists in, especially because one was a magician. He didn't want anything to do with any kind of scientific organization or with us in general. Ed Warren did not like our organization at all. I mean, take a listen to this response he had on a radio program concerning PsyCop.
Have you ever had an observer from PsyCop or a similar organization
from where?
Come in? From PsyCop, the Committee for the Scientific Investigation.
Oh,
don't even bring them up, sir.
You mean that atheistic organization?
Please, they are...
Is that the Prometheus book?
Yes.
Oh,
I know.
They're a bunch of nuts.
They're the most uncredible.
An organization which would very much like to know about paranormal forces, if they do exist, and be able to verify their existence.
Are you talking about the one where Dr. Kurtz is in charge of?
Yeah,
well, Dr. Kurtz,
Humanist magazine.
Yeah, to begin with, is an atheist. He gave atheistic courses in college. He was asked by the Smurls to come in there a year before. He called them nuts, kooks. They were on dope. Don't bother them. But as soon as the case made headlines, he sent about 4 of his people down there, which we would not allow into the house when they had told us that they were with the local college.
No, they mentioned that they were from, University of Pittsburgh. And I asked him which campus, and he could not tell me. Now, my husband and I have been college speakers for 20 years, and when this man could not tell me what campus of University of Pittsburgh that he was with, and also the fact that he was a magician and a real trickster, to say the least. No, sir, they are not credible people at all, and we would not bring people of that caliber in on any case we're involved in.
Yeah, you don't want people of that caliber coming in and, explaining all that stuff and debunking your bullshit and taking away your book deal, Why would you do that? And just to be clear, the two guys that we sent down there, Rothman and Bush, did not misrepresent themselves. They stated plainly who they were. And I'm guessing it's the fear that now you have a scientist, a physicist in there, and a magician that's in there. That scared the shit out of Ed Warren. So he did the only thing he was really good at, making stuff up, and denied entry. So despite us trying to get in there to properly investigate the situation, we were denied, and they actually called the cops and had them thrown out of the backyard. On August 27th of 1986, just a few days after the press conference, the Morning Call newspaper announced that there was a planned exorcism of the house. This was a surprise to Janet Smurl and also the Catholic diocese. The Smurls were trying to get the Catholic Church involved in this, but they were hesitant. To give them credit, the Catholic Church was actually doing a proper investigation, not like the Warrens did. Back to the exorcism. So it was planned by Ed, who apparently didn't tell the Smurl family until the newspapers announced it. This is a good one. On September 5th, 1986, just 1 month after going public, the Tribune, a Scranton newspaper, reveals that a movie deal in the works after Jack Smurl met with Ralph Loma, head of Star Productions, actor Jason Miller from the Exorcist movie, and William McAndrew, who was Miller's publicist at the time. So nothing was confirmed to be signed, but we did have witnesses, including a phone interview with William McAndrew, who is the Miller's publicist, a phone interview saying that, yes, they did have a meeting and they were talking about a movie deal.
Okay, what I really want to know is I did get back to the clipping, but there were a few different reports on how you're involved with the case exactly. Are you involved with a movie deal, or is there a movie deal in fact?
No.
A couple of the articles said
An AP story that circulates that they signed a contract.
Were there negotiations?
There was a negotiation.
Things that make you go, In September of 1986, Mary Beth Gurman and Barry Carr, who was my former boss until he retired, what the hell, Barry, traveled down to West Pittston, Pennsylvania in order to interview neighbors, and they also scored an interview with the previous owner, which we're going to hear in a little bit. And then, just 3 months after going public, on October 27th, 1986, Jack and Janet Smurl give a statement to the press saying that the house was now clean.
This house is clean.
Just a few days later, in November of the same year, St. Martin's Press announced that it planned to publish a book on the Smurls' experience, due out in late 1987 or early 1988. Again, another thing that makes you go, The contract also forbid the family from discussing the case with anyone other than Robert Curran, who is the author of the book, or a St. Martin's Press editor. Skip ahead to 1987, and there's very few articles that commented on the Smurl haunting, most of which featured Professor Paul Kurtz, which is the founder of PsyCop, which is now CFI, and then focused on his article that appeared in the winter 1987 issue of Skeptical Inquirer magazine, which you can see like here. It was all the information that he had collected on the Smurls and his assessment of the situation. In July of 1987, the house at 330 Chase Street is put up for sale, but it's taken off the market in September. We jump ahead a couple months to December of 1987, and we find out the entire house, the block house, the duplex of 330/328 Chase Street is put on the market again for sale, and it goes to an investor named Dick Bridle, who rents it out. And according to realtor Karen Collins of the Codwell Banker Howell N. Jones Real Estate Company, that was a lot of words. She is quoted in the October 30th edition of the Pittsburgh Press, stating, "To date, I haven't heard of any more ghosts or demons haunting that house." I don't think there ever was. April 11th, 1988, Jack and Janet Smurl appear on the Sally Jesse Raphael show, and I'm so bummed because I could not find a copy of this anywhere. Nobody has it. I've checked archives, nothing. But it'd be interesting to hear what they have to say about it, especially because the book was coming out. In December of 1988, the book called The Haunted, One Family's Nightmare which is written by Robert Curran with the help of Ed and Lorraine Warren, and of course the Smurls, is released. And also, the Smurl family moves into another house in Wilkesboro, Pennsylvania. Now we jump a couple years later to May 6th, 1991, and the Haunted TV movie is released. It was terrible. So bad. And then finally, we have September of 2025, when the fourth movie in the Conjuring series hits theaters September 5th, and by the trailer, doesn't look like anything in the trailer actually happened in real life. It is so sensationalized. All right, I want to take a couple minutes and talk about this book, The Haunted, before I move on to everything else, because I'll be referencing this book quite often as we go through some of the claims, because I'm going to be referring back to the book and some interviews and newspaper stuff. So I want you to understand why I despise this book, to be honest. So just to start you off, this is the bio that was included with the press release from St. Martin's Press. Robert Curran has been a reporter and feature writer for over 20 years. In 1985, Curran was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for a series of articles he wrote on patient abuse at the Clark Summit, Pennsylvania State Hospital for the Mentally Ill. He has written news and feature stories for Gannett News Service, the New York Times, Associated Press, and United Press International. He covered the Smurl case when they first went public for the Scrantonian Tribune and UPI, and he has witnessed many of the strange occurrences while writing this book. He lives in Clark Summit, Pennsylvania. I actually want to read you a review that perfectly describes how I feel about this. So this is from the Times Leader, which was published on March 6th, 1988, and it is by Joseph Marusak. And, I mean, you can see the headline right here on screen. It stinks, concludes reviewer. A new book about a local family that claims to be haunted and taunted by a demon is nothing more than a shoddy piece of reportage. It's a downright embarrassment to a profession that prides itself on telling both sides of a story, on asking tough questions, and conducting independent investigations to root out fakes or the misinformed. You would expect that a man who's been nominated for a Pulitzer Prize would do all he could to live up to those basic tenets of journalism. Instead, Scranton newspaper writer Robert Curran forsakes the principles of his trade to give readers a one-sided account of what did or didn't occur over several years in Jack and Janet Smurl's former home on Chase Street in West Pittston. He goes on to say later in the review, so does the reader get what's really needed here? A skeptical inquiry of the Smurls and the Warrens' claims? Hell would have a better chance of freezing over. Damn! But I agree. I thought it could have been much better. There was a lot of tough questions that were not asked at all. There was no investigation done into the history of the house or the people or trying to figure out exactly what was going on. There was no proof given. We'll get into that in a moment. One of the things that really set me off from the beginning, and with all of these kind of books, is when you look at the cover, you see up top, it says, "The True Story of One Family's Nightmare." Really? And then it actually goes on to say, I gotta look at it, more terrifying than The Exorcist, because it's true. I mean, first of all, no. Second of all, no. But here's where it really gets to me, okay? You read that on the cover. That sells the book. People walk by in a bookstore, they see it on the shelf or on the rack, and they're like, oh, look, it's a true story, let's read about it. It's gonna be scary. Let's pick it up. Oh, shit, it's scarier than The Exorcist, because it's true. But let's open it up and read everything, especially the author's note. Let me put my glasses on so I can actually read this. So one of the first things we're told, actually the first thing that we're told, is that the book that you were about to read was compiled from testimony of the 8 residents of the house, which is Jack and Janet Smurl, their 4 kids, and Jack's parents that lived on the other side. And then it goes on to say, as well as 28 other people who have experienced supernatural phenomenon in connection with the Smurl family. Who are those 28 people? We actually don't get to see them. We don't get to hear from them. I mean, of course, we're going to get into it a little bit in a minute, but there are people that are quoted in this book, but we don't know if they actually exist because a lot of them are anonymous. And we also come to a part where, again, this is in the author's notes, some of the people whose names appear in this book have been given pseudonyms to protect their privacy. Others have allowed their names to be used. All right, so besides the anonymous 28 people, because again, we don't know who they are, even though we go through this book, we can see some names, there's name changes. And as I read, some names have been changed. And that's a second point. My first point is that I understand people wanting to remain anonymous. I understand that they want to tell their story. They want to participate in something like that because it's their neighbor, especially if it's neighbors on the block on Chase Street. But they don't want the attention that it brings. When this story broke in 1986, people were showing up at all times of the day and night. And they were walking on the lawns.
Get off my lawn.
They were blocking the street. They were yelling boo in the window. People would walk up and constantly knock on the door, trying to get interviews or trying to get inside. I mean, I can understand it. But when you're trying to promote a true story, a true horror story, these are extraordinary claims, and you need to be able to interview the witness. And if you don't have a name because they're anonymous or they change the names to keep them anonymous in the book, that's a problem because now credibility is an issue. You don't know who to trust. Because Ed Warren and Lorraine Warren were involved, I don't even know if half these people existed. And let alone 28. We don't have 28 names listed in this book. So I don't know who to trust. And frankly, when it comes to anonymous name-changing eyewitnesses, I throw it out. I'm not going to take their accounts at face value because I can't trust them. I can't trust the Warrens. And when it comes to the name changes, there's a weird thing that happens. Like this is a first edition. This here is a first edition hardback. And when you read these, there are names in this book. There are names listed in this book for like the psychic that the Warrens bring, the team of psychic investigators that they bring to the house, some neighbors, some friends. There's a bunch of names. Even the one priest that they talk to, they're named in this book. But when you look at the later version, a PDF version, because I got a PDF to search through so I could make it easier to find some of the terms and the sections that I needed to see, I realized that the names were different. So I don't know if the first names were real. Probably not, because I couldn't find information on most of them. Or the second names were real. So, for instance, look at this. So Heather, the daughter, one of the daughters of the Smurl family, becomes Kim in the new version. The psychic that comes along with Ed and Lorraine Warren the first time they visit, it goes from Rosemary Fro, I know I'm mispronouncing that, to Diane Hayes. There's a Charles Cravatis. There's a Tony Clarachuzio. There's also a Mike Kessel. These are part of the team that Ed sends to the house. And all of these change names. So Charles becomes Jason Kearns. Tony becomes Ricky Monroe. And then Mike Kessel becomes Brad Peterson. Even the priest that they mentioned, Father Costigan, turns into Father O'Reilly. So I don't know who to trust between the versions, and are they just name changes? Are they fictional characters? Speaking of fictional characters, if we go back to the author's notes, we can see that there's a third paragraph says one character, David Wilson is used in the first edition. So David Wilson is a composite of 3 people who have worked with Ed and Lorraine Warren. The role of this fictional character, however, is unconnected to the supernatural events that have taken place on Chase Street. So this character, David Wilson, who later becomes Donald Bennett in later versions of the book, is a completely fictional character, has nothing to do with the story, and yet it's in this book, fills up some pages, and gives spooky and horror kind of things, demonology, all kinds of where it has nothing to do with the story. So, do I trust the author, who is a journalist and is supposed to have some kind of journalistic integrity? Do I trust him to write a true story here? No. Now, to add insult to injury, listen to this clip, this interview that Ed Warren has in 1988, and he's talking about the credibility of the people named in the book. Check it out.
Unless you actually see it, though, how are you really supposed to believe it? And even when we do see it in the film, how are we supposed to know this really happened?
Well, again, if you read the book, The Haunted, you'll find that there are priest names, there are college professors, ourselves, numerous credible people that you could go to for information pertaining to that case and the levitations and whatever else did happen there.
So I find this so funny because, one, the professor that he talks about is not named in the book. It actually says the professor, and that's it. It's kind of like Gilligan's Island.
The professor and Mary.
There's 4 priests that are named in this. One of them is Father Robert McKenna, which is Ed's buddy that he brings in to do the exorcisms that don't work. But the other 3 change names. Not only do they change names from the different versions, from the first printing to the last printing, but they are actually different from the real life people, because I do have the newspaper articles that name 2 priests that were contacted about this, that made comments, and they are not the ones that are named in this book. And lastly, the credible people that Ed refers to that are named in the book, they all have different names. There is no credibility. So I don't think Mr. Warren understood what the term credibility meant. So there's one last thing I want to address with the book before we go into some of the claimed experiences and retelling of events. So in the last paragraph of the author's note, it says, certain minor liberties have been taken with the chronology of events, and some scenes and dialogue have been recreated in a dramatic fashion. But each event described adheres strictly to the facts related by the witnesses. Yeah, contradict yourself much? You can't tell us that you have taken minor liberties with the timeline of events, some scene descriptions, and dialogue that was said by the characters in your story, while also saying we're strictly adhering to the facts. Bullshit. This piles on top of all the trust issues that I've already brought up with the name changes and not being able to interview the witnesses because they're anonymous. I mean, taking certain liberties, minor liberties, with the description of everything going on. I mean, it's ridiculous to say that when you're promoting, again, a true story. You know, it's not true anymore when you start manipulating the facts, when you dramatize the facts, when you sensationalize events that are going on, when you create dialogue in order to serve your narrative. You are not telling a true story anymore. You are telling a fairy tale. And in some situations, these minor liberties include making things up from whole cloth. For example, let's talk about what was known about the house before the Smurls got there. All right, so we've already covered the timeline and some inconsistencies and mistakes with that. We've also covered the author's note and the problems, the big problems with credibility with that. Now I want to jump into some of the claims. And we're going to start at the beginning of the book, really, with this one, because there's a chapter right after the introduction called The History of a Curious House. And in this chapter, it talks about how long before the Smurls arrived, this house had a reputation. It had stories about it, and that even the police were called at times. And we know that's not true. I want to be fair and says it does mention in the book that there is no such record of these investigations. We verified that. When Barry Carr and Mary Beth went down there in 1986 to investigate the claims that were going on, they went to the police station, verified there were no reports for that building, for that house. This idea is starting to look like it's created from whole cloth, that it's fabricated just for this book, to sell this book, to set the stage for a horror story that's to come. But the book continues talking about rumors, talking about how one story said that there were strange and terrible noises that could be heard from the house when it stood unrented and unoccupied. There was also a hint that somewhere in the vicinity, witchcraft was being practiced, and that its dark powers might affect the entire neighborhood.
Well, that's just lazy writing.
And then there was a one-time resident that, wanted to remain anonymous because reasons. But he talks about sitting at the dinner table with his parents, and his parents are talking about satanic things going on in that house. This is all creating this narrative that never existed. So I've looked everywhere, through newspaper archives, through the historical societies in the area, everywhere that I could think of, trying to find any indication that there were stories about this house prior to the Smurls living there. And you know what? There is none. I could not find any hint at all that there were stories like what's mentioned in the book here at this house. There's nothing. But it's not just Robert Curran writing this in his book. So even Ed Warren makes this claim, because in an interview in 1988, after the book was released to the public, he went on a news station and did an interview in which he says this.
The Smurls moved into a home which had what we call an aura of disaster about it. It was known for years that this house was haunted, but the Smurls didn't pay any attention to that.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, the book's already out. Ed's making his money. He got his piece of the pie, and now look at that. He's turning on the owners. He's turning on the Smurls, saying it's their fault because they knew that the place was haunted and they moved in anyway. They didn't care. Like, wow. Move. What's interesting is that this took me on a deep dive, a rabbit hole into the previous owners. I wanted to know who owned the house, who lived in the house. So I went digging through, and my first stop was the file that we have on this case. This file is pretty big. In this file, there was a cassette tape. Actually, there was two. This one contained an interview with Scott Ellis Jr., who was the former owner of 328 Chase Street, which is the right side of the house where Jack and Janet's parents, well, Jack's parents, lived in. It's interesting because they have an interview and it talks about not only him owning it, but living in it when he was younger, 1920, and talking about who owned 330. Let's listen to the interview. Oh, just a heads up, it is not a great recording. It's a few minutes long, so just bear with me.
Hi, Mr. Ellis? Can I talk to you for a minute? I used to live at the Smurl house on 330 Chase. Wrong, Alice?
What do you want? Well, we were from the committee for the scientific investigation of claims of the paranormal, and we were given your name. We were told that you used to live at the house, and who you're with? The committee for the scientific investigation of claims of the paranormal. We're skeptical about what the Smurls are saying, and we're down here investigating to find out if...
Well, I lived in that. I owned that house. I lived in that house for 17 years. I never had any noises there.
Never heard anything?
That's a good solid house. It's never been caved. No caves. I didn't know who you were. Right. There was no caves in that house. The cellar was dry and as a desert. No matter how much rain you get.
Then you lived there 17 years and you never heard...
I never heard nothing. My brother lived there after my father died. My mother. My aunt lived on the other side.
Okay.
We never had any problems. My mother would hear noises over there, but it was the tenants. You know, the tenants that were in there. There was just noise. You know, they dragged stuff around, but never known.
What do you think is going on now then?
If anything.
Well, I don't know. I feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
I know that Jack and Janet, I never knew them before they bought the house. I owned 328. My brother owned, or my cousin owned 330. It's a nice house. We never had any problems at all. In fact, I was going to buy the house from my cousin Dick. I was going to buy it and fix it up for myself. But then I decided it would be too big. I wouldn't be afraid to live there alone.
You think the Smurls are on the up and up?
I think they're nice people. I can't say anything about them. See, I sold my side to Jack and Janet's, Jack's father and mother on the 328 side. And my cousin owned the other side, and they didn't want to buy the house without they could buy the whole house. So I persuaded my cousin Dick Smith to sell the side. So he told us he wasn't going to sell it. He was going to keep it. Thought maybe sometime he'd want to come back here.
If he's not in town anymore.
No, he's in the middle. I wouldn't hesitate to buy that house back from him.
You don't believe that it's in the house then?
No.
But they told us today they never had any problems in the house they owned before, and they lived in Wilkes-Barre before. And they said they never had any problems until they moved into this house.
They don't have any problems now either.
No.
I really don't know what to say, but I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we never had any problems there.
Okay.
I lived there from 1920. I was 7 years old. I was married when I was 24. I moved out 17 years later. 17 and 7. I was 24. And my brother lived there after. We got transferred down to New Jersey. He stayed there. My aunt my uncle was a railroader, And he was gone 2 or 3 days, you know, on long runs, you know. And she would sleep there alone.
So the Smurls bought it directly from your family then, you and your brother.
They brought it to my cousin.
Your cousin.
The other side, and I sold them just my side. And
so your family lived there immediately before the Smurls moved in? Members of your family?
Yeah. Yep.
All right, so we got some good information there. We know that Scott Ellis, who is a junior, he lived in the house. So his family moved in there in 1920. It was late in 1920 because he doesn't appear on the 1920 census. But I know that he was in there because I can show you the 1930 census here, and it shows that, yes, his family was there. So he's in 328 Chase. It's Scott Sr., his father, and Mary, his mother, and then Scott Ellis, the guy that you heard on the interview, and then also his brother William. And you can see at 330 Chase, there is a Clarence and Bessie Smith. That is Scott's aunt and uncle. Also at 330 Chase, you can see there's Richard, and that is the cousin that Scott talks about in the interview. If we jump ahead to 1940 in the census, we can see that still at 330 Chase, there is Bessie Smith, her son Richard, and now there's Richard Vanscoy, which is Bessie's father. And in 328, it's Scott Sr., his wife Mary, and William, because by this time, Scott Ellis Jr. had gotten married and moved out. In 1950, we see that in 328, Scott Sr. and Mary are still living there, and now Bessie Smith is living there too. That's the aunt that was in 330, but she has moved over and rented her part of the house to a Fred and Lillian Struback. Fred was a stationary engineer for the coal mining industry, and his wife Lillian was a chambermaid at the YMCA. Pretty nice people. Now, that's it for census records because the latest one that was released was 1950, so I can't get 1960 or 1970 yet. But I did do some digging, and I found directories. And the directories for 1967 and 1968, it shows that Scott Ellis Jr. is living there at 328 Chase, because by this time, his father, Scott Sr., had passed away. He passed away in 1952, and I know Scott inherited the house, and I know that his mother Mary was also living at the house too. So, and I also know that she was there until 1972 because I have her death certificate. Scott Ellis is also shown to be living at the house in the 1973-1974 directory as well. So, granted, this directory came out in 1973, so it didn't account for the Smurls buying the house in October of 1973. The other directory for 330 Chase shows a Dorothy Runyon living in the house, both in 1967/1968, and then also the directory for 1973 and 1974. So I did look up Dorothy because I wanted to see, if we knew anything about her. And by all accounts, she seems to be a nice person. She was born in 1911. She graduated from West Pittston High School. She was employed by dress factories in the area, the Pittston area. She was a member of the First Presbyterian Church. So all around, nice person. And as far as the records go, she rented that house, that part of the house, until 1973 when Jack and Janet Smurl purchased it. So we know everyone that lived in that house from 1920 all the way up until the Smurls purchased the house, both sides, in 1973. So you can't blame the previous occupants or the previous owners. But Ed Warren did exactly that. In at least 2 newspapers, he is quoted as blaming previous families that lived in the house for starting this whole haunting and demonic thing. He literally blames another family without doing any research at all, because that's typical Ed Warren. Oh, it pisses me off. Anyway, so I want to show you these newspaper clips, and I also want to play a clip from the interview, the 1986 interview with Scott Ellis, who Barry Carr and Mary Beth interviewed, and his reaction to these quotes in the local newspaper.
Did you see a quote in the paper? Do you know that you're familiar with the Warrens, right? You name the Warrens?
I heard the name.
Okay, he did mention one thing that the people who they said the people who owned the house previously were responsible for bringing in the spirits.
Oh yeah, that's what they said. They said that there are 4 stages of demon possession. The first one is the opening of the door,
and they
opening to allow
the people that owned the house previously were opened the door for the spirits to come in. Any comment on that?
You believe that?
No, I don't believe it.
I don't believe a damn thing about that, buddy. I don't care what they say.
You don't have any comment in...
No,
Yeah.
I can't.
And then he said something about, that I can't comment on, Warren said I can't comment on that any farther because I'm afraid of a lawsuit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you better be careful because I'll nail him. I'll nail him.
You know, it doesn't surprise me at all that Ed Warren would blame the previous owners for the alleged demonic haunting, you know, the previous owners or previous family, saying that it was probably them, but he didn't want to say any more because of a lawsuit. That's his MO. According to the Warrens, it's Ouija boards, it's drugs, it's any kind of satanic rituals or any kind of seances. If you hold a seance in your house, I mean, holy shit, that opens the door to all kinds of demonic activity. I've done it a bunch of times. Doesn't work. But in this case, he couldn't blame the Smurls because of this.
What preceded it? What do you feel might have triggered it? Was there any Ouija boards that were played with in this home? Was any of the children involved in any way with drug traffic or the seances held in the home? Anything of this nature that took place in the house?
Not to our knowledge.
Not to your knowledge.
So after that, of course, they couldn't blame the Smurls because they claimed that, no, they didn't do any of the Ouija boards or anything like that, and they are good Catholic people. So it's much easier, especially in 1986, to blame previous owners since the Smurls had already owned the house since 73. So there was no research involved, nothing at all. But luckily, they have people like us that can do the research and clear the names of the previous families and owners that own that house. So nobody's fault except Ed and Lorraine. So in the beginning of the book, after the Smurls move into the house, there are a few little disturbances that happen, and it's recorded in the book, and I want to cover them real quick. I don't want to spend too much time on them because according to an interview that the Smurls did, they really didn't think any haunting activity started until 1985.
How long were you in this home with your family before you became aware of the fact that things of a paranormal nature were occurring?
Approximately 1 year ago.
1 year ago, in 1985,
yes,
you became aware that something paranormal was taking place.
These little disturbances that I'm going to cover took place in 1974 and 1975. But again, I think they're going to come up in the film because I know they showed up in the 1991 film, the TV movie that came out. So I'm kind of predicting that they're going to come out here. So I want to cover them. So the first thing that happens is a carpet stain. Apparently they bought a new carpet to go in the living room, I believe. And when the workers came out and put it down, there was a big stain, a round stain in the middle. And they used cleaning solution to clean it up because, you know, they were like, what the hell? And they cleaned it up, and then 2 days later, it came back. They tried it again to clean it up, and they eventually rolled up the carpet, put it in the dumpster, and bought something new, which I don't agree with. I mean, if I got a brand new carpet and it had a big stain on it, I'd be calling the company and going, you need to replace this, not cleaning it myself. So when they put the cleaning solution on it, it could have just changed the colorization of it and blended it in with the rest of the carpet. That's why it appeared to be cleaned up. But after it dried, it came back. In any case, we don't know what kind of stain it was. The book says it was a grease stain, but we're not sure because, granted, this event happened 11 years prior to the Smurls thinking anything haunting or ghostly was going on in their house. This was 1974, and by the interview that we just saw, they didn't think anything was happening until 1985, you know, when the Warrens took over. It could have been anything. It could have been discoloration of the rug itself. It could have been a grease stain. It could have been some other chemical or just a discoloration of the fabric that was used for the carpet itself. And when they used a cleaning solution, it simply got it wet and it blended the color into the rest of the rug. And when it dried, maybe a day or two later, that's when they noticed that the ring was back and it wasn't actually cleaned up. Also, remember that certain liberties were taken with the retelling of these stories. So we don't know anything about this carpet. So let's move on to the TV set. So according to the book, it says that Jack Smurl sat down to watch a Western movie on his television set and that it blew up. Basically, it's, let's see, let me quote from the book. Tired from a long day's work, Jack was at the TV set one night in 1974 enjoying a Western film when suddenly the set, without giving any advanced warning, because they never do, burst into flame. The way it might had a plastic bomb been thrown at it. So plastic bomb here means like plastic explosives. So there's a few things with this. One, from 1969 to like 1974, there were problems with television sets because there was a transition from black and white to color. And the color televisions used a lot more power and they had insufficient wiring and components inside. So there was a commission by the United States that looked into this. And they found that at one estimate had about 10,000 fires that were caused by TV sets in that time. So given that he took the TV set, this was not a brand new TV set, he brought it from where they had lived prior to the Chase Street house. So it could be possible that this was one of the TV sets that simply overheated and caught fire. I doubt it exploded like it was from plastic explosives, because let me show you, this is 1 ounce of plastic explosives done from a Mythbusters clip, and they show you how big the explosion is. So you're going to see the difference.
Let me see this. It's going to have a hole in it.
Even just 1 ounce packs a real punch.
Wow. That would be a hole through and through.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that didn't happen in the Smurl house. Moving on. One of the other strange things that happened in 1974 was during renovations, Jack and Janet Smurl were redoing the bathroom and they had a porcelain sink and tub, which apparently after they were done everything, there were scratch marks all over it. And quoting the book here, it says, "The sight was ugly and disturbing, as if the talons of some frenzied beast had clawed at the porcelain." I mean, that's definitely a dramatized version of it. And most likely what would happen is that during renovation, they weren't paying attention to the tools or how they were handling it, maybe what they had in their hand, or if they were trying to position things, they weren't paying attention to where their tools were, what they were putting inside the tub, and they simply scratched it themselves. It's something that everybody does. All homeowners that do their own renovations run into these kind of problems. It's not something to suspect that there's a demon in your house. So let's move on. So another part of this beginning chapter is Dawn's terror. And that outlines a story. It's a very small story. It's only 2 paragraphs long. But apparently Dawn, the oldest daughter, she had nightmares. She was having a nightmare, and it says during 1975, Dawn several times ran into her parents' bedroom screaming that she'd just seen people floating around her room. And then each time Jack and Dawn would go in to investigate, but were unable to find anything. So understand here that in 1975, Dawn would have been about 6 years old, because when we see earlier in an interview that Lorraine Warren does with the Smurls, she does it in February of 1986. And Jack Smurl says that Dawn is 16 years old.
Dawn is 16 years old. Heather is 13. Shannon and Karen are 7.
Go back about 10 years and you have a 6-year-old that's complaining about nightmares. So I'm not trying to say that anything's wrong with the child or anything like that. It's just that a 6-year-old having nightmares about people floating around the room, it's not something to think the house is demonic. It's a child having nightmares. Also, night terrors is a thing. Night terrors are common for kids between the age of 3 and 12, and they eventually go away, but between 3 and 12, 6 is right there. I mean, this is something that's a much more logical conclusion and explanation for it than thinking that it has any part in a haunting going on in this house. So again, I just wanted to address little things like this because I think this is going to show up in the movie, and I want to cover all my bases. So the last thing I want to go over is renovations to the water pipes, the plumbing in the house. So in 1974, Jack and his father, John, start working on the plumbing and I guess putting in new pipes or fixing the pipes. I don't know exactly what they were doing, but they were working on the pipes. Apparently it all leaked when they were done. When they turned the water on, everything leaked. They went back and fixed it, and it still leaked. So this is brought up as a mysterious occurrence. And I don't think it is. I mean, I don't know. I don't do plumbing. I've done welding. I understand welding, and I've done it before. I'm not great at it, but I'm good at it. When it comes to soldering water pipes together, I'm not good at it. So I reached out to somebody that I know that is a plumber, and you guys might know him too. So let's go talk to an expert in plumbing. So I'm here with Jason Halls. You are an experienced plumber, correct?
30 plus years, yeah.
Okay. So in the book, I'm going to read it out here. It just says that they are, let's see, in 1974, they were doing renovations. And John Smurl, who is the father of Jack Smurl, is an experienced welder. And they soldered 30 joints in copper tubing for the water pipes. And when Jack turned the water on, however, all the joints leaked. Mystified, John Smurl soldered the pipes again a second time, and they still leaked. And they bill this as a mysterious occurrence that's followed by other weird things. So I know it says he's an experienced welder. I have experience in welding, but I didn't think it was the same as soldering water pipes. But
No.
I'm not the expert.
Being a welder is 100% different. I mean, you're actually using a welding rod and welding metal together. Soldering is very different. What you're doing is you're taking fittings or the copper pipe, you're cleaning the inside, scratching it up, and then you're putting a substance called flux in there, and you're putting the pipes together. You're heating it up with a butane or a MAP gas torch and running the solder. As it melts, the flux draws it into the line. I mean, they have nothing. They're not the least bit similar. I mean, it's two totally different things. So being a welder doesn't matter. I mean, if you're trying to just solder a pipe together, but you don't put the flux in, you're going to leak. If you have any water in the line and you're trying to solder a pipe together, that water turns into vapor, and steam. And no matter what, trying to solder with water in the line, it's probably going to leak as well. So the solder is not going to hold in. But if you don't use flux, you're already opening yourself up to a can of worms. And a welder wouldn't know that. I mean, something that he's done in the past, a welder wouldn't typically know. I got to use flux when I'm soldering.
So it's not unusual for someone that doing home repairs, if they're a welder and they're not experienced in soldering water pipes, this could happen.
Yeah. You know, I can solder any pipes. I can do all that. I can't weld at all. And like you can weld, but you can't solder. So, I mean, there's a huge difference there, and there's a huge learning curve. I mean, it's two totally different fields. It's two totally different aspects of metal. And I mean, you need to do it properly when you're in the plumbing field, especially, like I said, flux is so important. Even if you have a downline and you're trying to solder a joint, to get the solder to pull in is almost impossible unless you have flux on there, because if not, you're just melting it and the solder is going to run down the pipe.
Right.
So you need to be able to draw it in. So being a welder doesn't give you any benefit when it comes to doing plumbing work, just like being a plumber doesn't give me any benefit when I'm trying to weld something.
Right. Okay, cool. That's all I need to know. And I appreciate your time. So thanks for stopping by.
Anytime, man. Talk soon. Stay safe.
All right. I bet you didn't expect to see Jason in one of my videos. But he is an expert when it comes to plumbing. So his expert opinion is valuable, and I appreciate him coming on. So yeah, let's move on. So the first major event that they attribute to alleged paranormal activity is the thing with the light fixture in the kitchen. So let's hear Janet Smurl actually describe what happened.
And we have a 4-foot by 2-foot ceiling light, and it came without no warning at all. In a matter of a split second, it came crashing down onto the kitchen table.
Now that light is held up by 2 chains,
right.
And then
and 2 eye hooks,
hold it into the beam.
Into the beam.
So, yeah, if this situation happened, I'd be pretty scared too for my family, for my kids, because there's a small child there and she got struck by the light when it crashed down. However, I want to point out that the renovations that were done in 74 looks like they included the kitchen and also the bathroom above, because we see in a video that Lorraine Warren did from the same interview that you just watched.
When they first purchased this home, this room was a little bit larger, but they have enlarged their bathroom, which has kind of reduced the size of this room.
From that video, we learned that the room that the twins are in is right next to the bathroom, and that was shortened. It was actually made smaller because they enlarged the bathroom. That sits right above the kitchen. Keep in mind that we just talked about the water pipes being redone and that they leaked, and that they were fixed and then leaked again. So if you have water leaking right on top of where the kitchen light is, which is possible because they have a shower and they have a sink, they have a toilet, it's all right there. Keep in mind that the renovations were done in 74, and this incident with the light coming down happened in 85. So that's 11 years later. So you could have damage that started then, it just got worse over time, and finally it just gave way. We're told that the eye hooks were embedded into the beam up top, but we don't really know if that's true or not, because in the book we're told that there was plaster that came down with it. So I don't know if it was through the plaster and into the beam, or if the eye hooks were only secured into the plaster that was in the ceiling. Because if that was the case, and you only had like 1 or 2 threads biting into the beam, then it's not as secure as they expected. This is an oversight. This is something that could definitely happen if it's an amateur that's doing these renovations. And this is not an insult to Jack Smurl, but he was a manager at a gum factory. He was not a welder. He was not a craftsman. He was not a electrician. He was not any of these things. So I really wouldn't trust that he did a quality job. And again, that's not being insulting. It's just he probably did the best he could. It's just over time, stuff started breaking down. And unfortunately, one of the casualties was this kitchen light. And just to add on my personal opinion here, after reading all the material, it really feels like Ed Warren and Lorraine Warren had an influence on changing the meaning behind some of these experiences. So something that just happened that probably was a result of amateur craftsmanship turned into, this is demonic activity and a demon is attacking you by ripping your kitchen light out of the ceiling, which is kind of silly when you really think of the grand scheme of things. But yeah, I really think the Warrens had that much of an impact on this family and exploited their beliefs in order to change how things were perceived. But let's move on.
Okay, now when was it, Janet, that you were down in the basement?
The very next day after the confirmation, I was down in the basement doing clothes. I have my washer and dryer down there. And I had turned away from the washer. I was just getting ready to come upstairs to the kitchen. And I heard this female voice. And she said, Janet, Janet, very clear. And I thought it was my sister. I said, I'll be right up. Well, when I got to the top of the steps, of course, there was no one there. And I was alone in the house. The front door was locked. There was no way that anybody could have gotten into this house.
Were you very uneasy?
I thought in the beginning, I thought, oh, it's only you. You're hearing things. That's exactly how I felt, that I had heard something.
So this seems like a pretty simple experience. No big deal. There's nothing unusual here. She was doing laundry. She thought she heard someone say her name. And then she replied thinking it's her sister, mentions that, and says, I'll be right up. And then goes upstairs, finds nothing. That's not really a big deal. That happens to all of us. And it's more common than you would think. I mean, people hear their name being called while they're in the shower or if they're watching TV. It's a common thing because when we live with people, we're used to hearing our name being called. So once in a while, yeah, we're going to get a false positive. However, the account that's in the book is much different than what we just watched being described. So in the book, first of all, this event that she talks about with hearing her name called takes place before the kitchen light fixture comes down. So the chronology of events is off here, which we already knew because, you know, we covered that with the author's note in the beginning, that he was going to screw with the timeline here. So good job. But when we do take a closer look at this thing, it actually takes place over like 3 to 4 pages. Instead of hearing her name called out twice, it's 7 times. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Turn a page. 6, 7. 7 times. And this version is much more scarier because, you know, it has to be. And it describes things like she knew that she was not alone in the basement anymore. She felt a presence. She had fear rising up inside her. That she heard a voice and she could only stare at the area where it was coming from. She knew it was right in front of her. And then it was behind her. Kenny. And then she, you know, turned around looking for somebody and wasn't there, and she was freaking out, and she went up the stairs backwards until she heard the voice again and then ran upstairs only to find nothing up there. So there's a few details I want to point out in the book that's not mentioned in the interview that you just saw with Lorraine Warren. Granted, we can't take anything in here at face value because, you know, creative licensing. But it's mentioned that the TV is on upstairs and that it can be faintly heard from the basement. So Janet actually hears it, again, according to this book. There's also a square window that's mentioned being in the basement. And if there is a window, then it's possible that she heard something from outside. If the TV is on, then it's possible that she heard the TV. Also, not mentioned in this book version is the fact that Janet thought it was her sister calling her. The only sister outside of the immediate family that's mentioned in this book is Jack's sister. And I can see how Janet would call her sister instead of sister-in-law. However, when you read about this experience, the sister is not mentioned anywhere near that experience in the book. She's actually mentioned towards the end of the book when Jack and Janet want to take a weekend away. So why am I spending so much time in this? Because I want to show you the differences between the recorded interview, the words coming right out of Janet's mouth, and then the book version, which is highly dramatized. And this is going to continue when you go see this movie, The Conjuring 4, that's coming out. You're going to see a sensationalized version of this, and it's going to be really blown out of proportion, and it's going to make it look like so much more went on. And it didn't. Basically, what I want to point out is that the story evolves over time. Every retelling, when new people hear the story and they retell it to somebody else, the story evolves and becomes more dramatic over time. So you really have to go back to the primary source. And when we do go back to the primary source, the first interview with Janet Smurl about this experience, we find that it's very mundane and very boring and a typical experience that almost everyone has gone through. And it's not a big deal. So, all right, moving on.
And the closet door would open and shut.
All right, explain that incident.
We have tried to do this many times, and we thought it was very strange. This door would open and shut, and there is no way. We can't do it. We've tried to do it, and it's impossible. You cannot open the door and pull it back. You have to push it in the middle.
How fast would you say that is going?
Oh, it was going very fast. It would be going back and forth, and you cannot do that. Mm-hmm. There is no way that you can do that.
So I was going to get into this one, but I realized that Lorraine Warren actually debunked it herself. Watch this.
But I think one of the most outstanding things is the fact, I will show you how these drawers work. Now it's kind of hard to have them swing, and yet this is how they will swing back and forth at great speed when the infestation or phenomena is occurring. Actually, I'm able to move them a little easier than we were able to move them early on.
Oh, that makes for an awkward moment when you do the impossible thing by accident. Next.
The dog was transported from the upstairs downstairs without having never gone by you, and you were sitting there, and this researcher was being very much aware of what was taking place.
Right, because where Jack was sitting and where Mike was standing, they would have had to move to let the dog down the stairwell. Mm-hmm. And they weren't. I mean, he was down here and they were upstairs.
So this experience can probably be explained by just not paying attention. You have two guys. Jack Smurl was sitting at the top of the stairs, and then this gentleman, Mike, who I assume is with the Warrens, he's standing on the stairs. And although Lorraine and Janet both say that the stairs are kind of narrow, they're not as narrow as they're making it out to be. A person can definitely stand on those stairs, as we see later in the video, and a dog could definitely walk down along the side. Because you know what? I'm a dog owner. I'm a dog lover. Dogs don't care. If they want to get down the stairs, they're going to get down the stairs, even the German Shepherd that they have. So I'm assuming here, so I'm going to speculate, just to be clear, that the two men that were on the stairs were discussing the events in the house, or the alleged events in the house. And Jack was probably at the top going, you know, stuff happened down this hallway, and maybe down this hallway, or in that room, or this in, and Mike was just paying attention to him, and they both just didn't pay attention to the dog when it went downstairs, and that's it. And then later on, a few minutes later, or maybe 10, 15 minutes later, when they finally came downstairs, or the dog made a noise, they were like, what the hell? You know, I thought the dog was up here. I've done that. I think all of us have done that, where we think the dog is in a room somewhere, and we realize it came from a different direction, or something like that. It's just a matter of not paying attention to your environment. And given the fact that these guys were engrossed in the conversation, it could happen. There was another experience where Jack describes about the dog howling. Like, they were in bed, him and Janet were in bed, it was at night, they claimed they weren't sleeping yet, but they heard this howl that they thought was coming from the dog. And Jack reached down, touched the dog, and realized the noise wasn't coming from the dog. For this one, the details are lost to time. We don't know what they heard. We don't have a recreation of the sound or a recording, so there's nothing to go on. So I'm going to move on. The last thing I want to touch on is the incident involving the dog being levitated and then thrown into the back door. This is an experience that's detailed in the book, but is not in the interview that we see with Lorraine Warren. So I don't know when this happened. It looks like it happened early on, according to the book. But again, we know that the author took minor liberties with the chronology of events, so we don't know when this allegedly happened. However, Janet says she was doing the dishes and that she noticed that the dog, which was curled up on the floor at her feet, was lifted up and slammed into the back door. I don't know the layout of the kitchen too well. I mean, I have a photograph that doesn't show where the sink is, so I don't know where the dishes were. I don't know where Janet would be in the kitchen, like positioned in the kitchen. But normally the sink is up against a wall and or window with it, so she would be facing the wall or window, either looking out back or looking to the side of the house. And the dog would not be in front of her. It would have to be on the side or behind her. And I'm assuming the kitchen door, which is mentioned in the book, because it's said that the dog was levitated and thrown into the kitchen door. There is no kitchen door separating the kitchen and the living room, not that I can see, at least from this photograph. So I'm assuming it's a back door, which would mean that Janet would be doing the dishes and looking to the side in order to see this event take place. So again, I don't know. There's no mention of it in the interview, so I don't know how embellished this story might be, or if it even happened at all.
Numerous occasions in all parts of this house on both sides, especially during the nighttime hours, where you are experiencing pounding and sometimes knocking sounds. Not all pounding.
All right, so bangs and knocks. This is pretty much Haunted House 101. So almost every house that I've ever heard of that claims to be haunted has some kind of knocking going on or banging going on. It could be animals that jump down onto the roof and run around, or they're in the walls somewhere. It could be people at the other end of the building or on a floor below or above you that are walking around, or maybe drop something, maybe bumped into a cabinet or something. It could be a lot of things. It could be water pipes, where you have air in the water pipes, and if somebody turns on a faucet downstairs, you get that knocking sound. There's quite a few logical explanations that can be applied to these scenarios. And one that I did not see applied to at the time, or in the newspaper clippings about the Smurl case at the time, was that there were 4 kids in the house. You had 2 teenage girls and then 2 younger girls that were in the house. And pranks, having fun with the story, you know, especially when you're screwing with grown-ups, it's possible. It might have started out as a game We've seen this before, such as the Enfield case. You know, when a little messing around and fooling around trying to trick their mom got out of hand. But I can't say for sure. I was not there. I acknowledge that. But we also didn't have scientific investigators there. We had a scientist, we had a magician approach the family and try to get in. They were given permission at first by the Smurls, but then Ed Warren stepped in and said, whoa, 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 no science here. Just our greedy belief that we're going to get money out of this. There's no science. You can't debunk this. You're not allowed. I want to point out that animals walking around on the roof is a very real possibility. I want to play this clip. This is from when I did a review with Beardo Get Scared, and we were looking into the House in Between documentary. And we were talking about footsteps that were heard from upstairs, that there was a ghost hunting group, they heard footsteps, which they thought was coming from the second floor bedroom. And honestly, the sounds that animals can make will sound like that. It'll sound like footsteps running up and down a hallway. So take a look at this.
She went around to all these businesses within the area and said like that to get them other
and that's just here in my office. It's squirrels that run across the roof, and it sounds like footsteps. So if I'm outside in the lobby, I can hear that, and it really sounds like somebody's running across the roof. There's a very real possibility that what they were hearing were squirrels and maybe other animals jumping onto the roof from this big tree that you see right out front of the house that goes over the roof of the house. I mean, that's the most logical explanation. And even though Janet and Jack do address this,
there with myself, the same thing happened to us again, like scratching all around up above us. Okay.
But yet nothing was on the roof.
Nothing.
Well, nothing was on the roof.
The first time we even sent Heather out to the backyard, we said, Heather, go outside and look up on the roof and see if you can see any birds. Or she said, no, there's nothing up there. But yeah, you could hear this, and it was loud, like a loud scratching. Not like a squirrel would make. It was really loud,
like a cat or
even louder than like a large animal. Very loud.
And there would be no way that a large animal could get on that roof.
No, absolutely not.
Honestly, that's not an investigation. You actually need a good view of the roof, not just standing outside and looking up, because you don't see the full roof. And by the time she made it out back or along the side or even out front, the animal was probably gone. So not a good investigative technique. So as you can see from the disclaimer, this is a sensitive subject that we're going to deal with, and it may be uncomfortable for some viewers. So there's not going to be any jokes here. There's not going to be any sarcastic words flashing up on screen or anything during this segment. I just want to get through this and give my possible explanation of what might have happened here. So the chapter we're dealing with here is called Raped by a Succubus. And in it, Jack Smurl is being interviewed by the author of the book, Robert Curran, and he's talking about how he woke up to this kind of nightmare with a grotesque kind of woman. He claims that she paralyzed him in some way, he wasn't sure how, and that watched her walk from the shadows, come over, mount him, had intercourse with him, and then disappeared. She was just gone. And he was left with what he described as a sticky substance. And when asked to elaborate on that, Jack does say that, yes, I suppose you'd have to compare it to semen, the texture of it anyway. And he's talking about getting up afterwards, going to the shower, cleaning himself off, and then going down to tell his wife, who was not happy about it. She was upset about it. There is a chapter later in the book, towards the very end, that's called The Second Attack, and it also describes a similar situation. Again, Jack is claiming to wake up because he was already asleep, and that pretty much the same thing happened. And he was left with a sticky substance on him that he got up and washed off in the shower. I want to make it clear, I am not a doctor, I am not a psychologist, I am not a psychiatrist, I am not diagnosing anything. what I see here, when I read the description, and the only description that I can find is in the book. So, first and foremost, remember, minor liberties. That's what we're told in the author's note, that there are minor liberties taken with dialogue, with the scene description, with the chronology of events. So, I don't know what to believe here. I couldn't find any other descriptions outside of the book. Newspaper clippings do mention it, but only that Jack claims to have been raped twice. When I read the description stating that Jack feels that he was paralyzed in some way, that leads me to sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is the inability to move or speak, either while you're falling asleep or when you're waking up. And it occurs between REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement, and wakefulness. It's your body's safeguard against you acting out your dreams. So it basically paralyzes your body. So your muscles can't move and you can't flail around. So if you're dreaming about like fighting a monster or flying through the air or just taking a walk through the park, you don't actually act it out while you're in bed. Also common during sleep paralysis is hallucinations. So people can hallucinate things. They can see things, they can hear things that aren't really there. There's fear and panic that develop because of that. I mean, imagine not being able to move and hallucinating somebody coming into your room. This might be the first part of it, where Jack says he was paralyzed and he saw this figure coming out of the shadows. This falls right in with sleep paralysis. The second part of this experience, when he wakes up and says there's a sticky substance on him, could be due to nocturnal emissions, which is otherwise or commonly known as wet dreams. This is something that we usually associate with adolescent boys or teenage boys, but pretty much everybody has experienced this once in their lives. Some people have experienced it many times. It's not something to be embarrassed about. It's a natural occurrence. We all go through it. In fact, many people have them throughout their lives, even married couples. So what I think happened here was a combination of the two. I think if this really happened, and again, I cannot stress this enough, if this really happened, the likely cause, the more logical cause that we should be looking at is that Jack experienced sleep paralysis that was coupled with nocturnal emissions. And because of his beliefs, because they were a very religious family, they were a Catholic family, church-going family, this might be something that was an embarrassment to him. And considering the influence that the Warrens had on the interpretation of everyday events, you know, squirrels on the roof and stuff like that, I can see how this presented an opportunity for Jack to say, hey, I think a demon had sex with me, instead of admitting that he just had an experience with a very natural biological event. So, the 3 exorcisms. Yeah. All right, so they were performed by a gentleman named Robert F. McKenna. He was ordained a Catholic priest in 1958, but after the Second Vatican Council, which took place between 1962 and 1965, he apparently wasn't happy with some of the changes, and he broke off with several others to form his own church, the Orthodox Roman Catholic Movement. Basically, it sounds like he had a little hissy fit about some of the changes that were being made, and he went rogue. And for doing so, he was excommunicated from the Catholic Church. I wonder if they take that white collar thing away. Anyway, he performed 3 exorcisms, at least that's what we're told, in the house to try to clear out the demons and the ghosts and spirits and stuff, but they didn't work. Why, you may ask? Well, according to Ed Warren, who was quoted in a newspaper article, demons at the Smurl duplex were going from duplex to duplex, and that's why attempts at an exorcism were unsuccessful. Basically, they were playing hide and seek. Ed goes on to say that they need a team of exorcists, like 3 or 4 or something like that, in order to make sure that all the duplexes are clear and exorcised and all that, so, you know, all the little demons can't hide. After the 3 exorcisms failed, Ed and Lorraine Warren went back home. And when they went away, finally everything, I guess, calmed down, because on October 27th, 1986, Jack and Janet Smurl give a statement to the press saying that through their local priest and a lot of prayers, all the stuff has been resolved. Everything is calm now, which is good, because it was like 2 weeks before St. Martin's Press announced the book deal. All right, so what are my overall conclusions with this? I acknowledge that this is a case that happened 40 years ago. I mean, it started in August of 1986, and it is now September of 2025. So it's pretty far in the past. And I'm relying on newspaper articles and interviews and magazine articles and videotaped interviews by people, interviews on TV, like morning shows and news and stuff like that. And also the book, The Haunted, which I read way too many times in preparation for understanding what was going on. Besides a lot of manipulation with the stories for the book, it's painfully obvious how much manipulation of the story took place between the interviews that we know of, that we have access to because they're available in the public, and then the story that was presented in the book. Aside from the book, because I'm not even going to consider that, but looking at all the information that I have with the rest of the interviews and stuff like that, I can't help but think that this was a family, a very religious family that had some very mundane yet quirky things that happened, you know, with the kitchen light falling down and Janet hearing her name called in the basement twice, not 7 times, and nothing spooky about it, but maybe quirky. And maybe in the course of talking to neighbors and friends about it and mentioning it a little bit, somebody might have given them the impression that, hey, maybe you have a ghost or something like that. The knocking that they kept reporting could have been animals. It could have been the teenagers. It could have been just random sounds coming from Jack's parents on the other side or from the kids themselves by accident, like no messing around or hoaxing at all, just, you know, in the normal course of things. And they also had a dog. So who knows where the knocking came from or how much there really was. I think what happened was that they kind of freaked out a little bit. They were uneasy about it. They reached out to someone on the advice of a friend and called the Warrens, which was probably the biggest mistake they could have made. Because when the Warrens came in, they were a heavy influence on how things were interpreted. If you look at the interview that Lorraine Warren does with Jack and Janet Smurl, she interprets a lot of the very mundane events as paranormal or demonic. And I think, as we see with other cases that the Warrens are involved in, that Ed just dominated the conversation. He dominated everything that happened surrounding that family and how they interacted with the press and the media. So it was Ed's version that came out, not really the Smurls. So I can't really blame the Smurls too much because I think ultimately it rests on the shoulders of Ed and Lorraine Warren. I think there was a lot of manipulation going on. I think there were major liberties taken with the book that was presented to the public, and this story got blown way out of proportion. And I think the family, Jack and Janet Smurl, realized this when the media storm hit, and they realized that this is way too much, and they were looking for an opportunity to get out of it. And when the book deal came along, and the possibility of a movie deal, yeah, I think he jumped on it, that's my personal opinion, because this was a way out. This is a way to get a bonus check, a lump sum of money coming into them so that they could get out of the house, buy something else somewhere in a different place, and just move away from this media storm that they had created. And I don't blame him for not mentioning it to the public or trying to deny it in the press or when he was questioned by not only the newspapers, but our investigators as well, because he was just trying to get out of it and get his family out of the media spotlight. So in a nutshell, I don't think the place was haunted. There's no evidence. There is no evidence to analyze. Ed Warren claims that he has video cassette tapes of weird stuff going on, that he has audio cassette tapes. They've never been released, to my knowledge, in order for us to analyze. And in fact, one of the reporters that were there during their press conference, they asked him to release something to him. And here's his response. "We're giving you everything you're going to get," Warren shot back. "If you can bring up a couple of priests here to help these people, fine. But we really don't have to give you anything. For one thing, you're too obnoxious." Basically, when he was challenged to put up or shut up, he chose to be an asshole. So, it's a couple days later, and new information has come up. So, recently, a friend of mine, Stevie, who does the Truth or Demons podcast, she went to see the Conjuring 4 Last Rites, which is the film that is supposed to be based on the Smurl Haunting, which is all of the stuff that you just watched in this video. But Stevie went to see the film, and she reached out to me. We were going back and forth, and she was telling me the plot points and this and that. And then she mentioned a post-credits scene, which is not much. It's just a couple of images. So first, a real quick summary of The Conjuring Last Rites. It has nothing to do with the Smurl haunting. Like, nothing. I just went and saw it today, and the story, it's like they took the source material, all of this stuff that you just watched in this video, the book, the interviews and everything, and just threw it down the garbage disposal and turned it on and walked away, because it has nothing to do with this haunting, with this story. And what's even worse is that they introduce a different or new element into the story. They basically shift the focus of the story from the Smurl family to the Warrens themselves and their extended family. And in doing so, they come up with this idea of this mirror, this haunted, demonic kind of mirror that is the plot device for the entire movie. So everything about the movie's story stems from that mirror, which is supposed to be haunted, and the spirits or evil spirits come out of there and they have to destroy it and all this stuff. It's very cinematic, kind of horror lore kind of thing. But here's the thing. That mirror is in Ed's museum, the Warrens Museum. This is the post-credits scene that we get at the end of the film. There's a picture of Ed Warren, and I'll put a screenshot up here. Ed Warren's looking into the mirror. There's text on the bottom that says the mirror resides in the Warrens Museum, and there it is. And you can actually look up in a video that was done by Tony Spera in there where he's interviewing Ed in this Warrens Museum, and the mirror is there, and they talk about it. And it's funny because they debunk, by putting this post-credit scene in there, they literally debunk their own movie. Watch this clip of Ed telling the story about the mirror.
Okay, Ed, to the right of me, I see there's a mirror. Can you tell me about that mirror?
That's a magic mirror that a gentleman used in New Jersey to conjure up spirits. That mirror, as we know, is a reflection of spirits. Okay. Ghosts, apparitions, demons, devils can reflect their images on a shiny surface very easily. This was used for that purpose, only the man who did the conjuring, unfortunately, today is in a mental institution.
All right, so you got a New Jersey guy, you got him conjuring spirits out of the mirror, and then he went into a mental hospital. That sounds a little bit different from a family of 6 living in Pennsylvania and are devout Catholics. Yeah, I think my work here is done. Never stop learning.